Brian, if there's any NDA content for you, just let me know and I'll stop the recording.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so are we ready, Asia?
Yeah, you're set.
Okay, thanks. So I was tasked with sharing everything that we do around the EMS security or M365 security and how that all ties together, potentially focusing in on some Intune pieces. Just want to confirm before we get started, is that are we thumbs up on that direction? Is there something else within security realm that you guys are really interested in and want me to focus on as I get started here?
I think that's a fine place to start for us.
There was a Windows update and compliance section. I don't know if you can cover it, off the top of your head, like on a whim, but we can follow up afterwards if needed.
Your computer is about must restart. the comedy of it all. So Microsoft is forcing me to do a restart. Hold on, let me see if I can. Tawanda, can you help me through this potentially?
That might be the funniest thing I've ever heard in a conference call.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Is the question you're
Never mind. No, I'm teasing because you're the Windows person.
I know. I was trying to jog my memory and see what. But can you repeat the question?
No, I'm being forced to do a software center restart by Microsoft.
Oh, so you want me to share your slides? That's what you're saying?
Can you do that for me?
Let me look for it right now. No problem. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
And if not, I have them. So either way, Tawanda, just let me know.
Let me stop sharing the screen. That is great.
Did you make any changes to the deck, Brian?
Actually, it says 58 minutes, so I may be okay.
Okay. All right.
I may be okay.
We'll be on standby.
Yeah, be on standby. Let's see if we can't get through it. All right, so security. So the question was about Windows Update. Can we add that in? Let's see if we can throw that in at the end. Maybe Tawanda can add something along the lines of Windows Update. But let's see if we can't throw that in at the end. So what I'll do is I'm just going to walk through how we view security, and if I can hide that problem, how we view security within the realms of Microsoft 365 EMS enterprise security. So let me start the slideshow here. And I want this, I think it works best, and I like the way Tawanda went through it. And I just want to reiterate that point. Please feel free to stop me. Hey, what about this? What about that? We can dive off any way we can. There's a lot of content here. I could take each one of these core areas within security and spend 4 hours in each area easily. So the goal here is to maybe just touch on or retouch on some subjects that you guys may be familiar with or may not be familiar with. And then if there's some interest, just like we did in the first session here, we can set up some follow-up conversations and some deeper dives with the right persons who may need to see that. So the first slide here, I won't give you too much marketing here, but I think there's two things that sticks out here that I always like to call out is, first, we all know that technology is changing and the way we do business is changing. The 81% there, that story is all passwords are weak and stolen. And I think with MFA and what I've heard you guys talk about before with the PIN, right? We're all understanding that we got to rely less and less on passwords and more on other means to authenticate. This 90% one is pretty funny. I'm not sure how true it is. That it is sourced from a IBM Marketing Cloud, oddly enough, but says 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. If they said 5 years, I would probably give them a big agreement. But nevertheless, that's a big statement. And it says a lot about the data that's coming in and out and that we're generating as a society. This is getting to the core of what I'm going to talk about when it comes to security and in the industry approach. And the approach that a lot of your colleagues are taking, and that's this number here to the left, where there's 70, the average for companies with over 1,000 employees, right? 70 security products from 35 plus security vendors. It's a lot. It's a lot of coordination, a lot of moving parts. This is the story that I think we all know, and again, this is all leading into how we view security and how the Microsoft 365 security is laid out, right? There's some things that will always be retained by you, the customer, right? No matter which cloud variants you go with, right? Your data governance and rights and your endpoints, which is some of what you just talked about, and your account and access management. You know, there's some things that will be transferred to the provider, i.e., you know, your host, your network, you know, your data centers and such, and then you got the others that vary by service, i.e., applications, and so on and so forth. So this is a security landscape. Again, this is key because I think this security will address all of this that we will dig into real quickly here. There is going to be a mix, and you know, I've seen a few, but not many. That typically they're small, where you have a cloud-only implementation. Most customers have a hybrid style implementation of when it comes to implementing the cloud. They retain quite a bit on-prem. Typically, they're more important. Their data, their authentication, 80 with the ADFS token issuance. And they push things out in the cloud, i.e. Office 365 and other components. Complexity is increasing. The threats are evolving, as we well know. Cost is rising, of course. And of course, that last one, more importantly, the talent gap is widening. So how do you address all of those four problem areas and still be successful, right? This is the last kind of nail that I want to drive in about that best of breed model that, you know, years ago started to take shape, but others in the industries are quickly realizing that, you know, this best of breed model is broken. You know, I think I heard some of that on this call when it talks about upgrades and, you know, patch release coordination, and, you know, when one part moves, how does the other 15 products move and sync to maintain that coordination, and then how do you handle telemetry and alerts across and visibility? It's a lot going on with that best of breed model that doesn't work. And so this is the security shift that's happening, and that has to happen, right, to achieve that coordination and to lessen the complexity when it comes to security. You go less and less from a best of breed. That's not to say that you won't have a best of breed component here or there, but you want to reduce that landscape. And then you want a security that can kind of maintain, that you can maintain, make it simple, make it coordinate, make it talk, keep it to a point where your current staff and budget can maintain it. And now we're leading into Microsoft 365. So I'm going to skip through a couple slides here and go over our flow as it pertains to how we lay out security. So in the middle here, it's your crown jewel, it's your data. So it's what Red Cross cares about the most, right? And then we wrap your data with information protection. We call it our Microsoft Information Protection Strategy, right? That can consist of an array of things, right? From DLP solutions within your email, within your various collaboration products, to classification and labeling, to your Windows information protection, separating your corporate data on your Win10 box from any personal data that may come in, and keeping a fence around it. That's that information protection piece around your data. And then the next layer around that is your identity and access management, right? In order to get access to that protected, that crown jewel of information, you want to have a security component that handles the identities and the access to it. You know, how do we do authentications? You guys talked about the ADFS and the tokens, and how do you do MFA? When should you do MFA? You know, conditional access, that whole piece around the identity and access management. Then there's a threat layer. We're going to talk about the threat layer. How do you foresee threats? How do you predict threats? How do you mitigate threats? How do you reduce the life cycle of an existing threat. How do you hunt it, and how do you become more proactive as it pertains to threats? And then there's the security management piece of it all, right? How do you, without effectively being able to manage and see the telemetry and have that coordination, it's tough from a security perspective. And this is what M365 security does. It takes that security management. It may not be a single pane of glass, but it's close, right? And we won't go through the rest on the bottom there. So these are our 4 pillars that we're going to dive into today, really quick here. I know we're on a time crunch. Identity and access management, zero trust, threat, information protection, protecting your data wherever it lives, and that's a key point, and then security management. And then, of course, it's a holistic security across your entire landscape, from your cloud to your Word on a iOS device. Any questions so far? I know I'm kind of blazing along here, but any questions so far?
Let me throw a question out that you might be getting to, but it's not security governance, it's cost governance. It's not probably in the slide deck that you're looking at, but it was something that we would like to bring up as we're looking at where that information resides. And there's always a cost. I guess if you have to ask how much it costs, you can't afford it, but there's the on-prem versus cloud. If we were to look for a zero data center and move everything to the cloud, how much would that cost? We've done a lot of analytics on hybrid approach. 70% of people overpay by putting things in the cloud because they don't, differentiate. So there's ways to kind of see how much that stuff costs, and there's cost governance tools. Don't know if you're going to touch on that or if we just put a placeholder where that's a topic we'd like to bring up.
Yeah, and we do. We have something similar. That's not something that I have on this particular call, but
sure,
I can do a follow up with that because that is something that we can offer. I'm not sure to what extent. I know there's of course, with everything, right? There's a paid and a non-paid version that we can get you. Right, and there's some data points that we can get you around that cost tool to get really drill down into what you got going on there within Red Cross and what it means to lift and shift to the cloud and the financial impact. So let me follow up with that properly and get you the right guidance on how we can get you the answers to that.
Okay.
Hey, Brian, one question, request for clarification. Your slides reference a number of places, E5 specifically. Can you explain what that means relative to, that we have E5 is a Office 365 license SKU, which really more applies to the productivity components. And then we also have EMS E3 license, which maps to the security items, and we associate that license with all of our folks who are assigned an E3 or E5 Office productivity license.
Yeah, that's a great point. And let me call that out. Can you guys still see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go real quick here, and this is definitely worth mentioning. M365, and trust me, I had to get a PhD to understand all the 365s that we offer, and I'm still learning. Consists of 3 main layers, right? It's Win 10, it's the EMS security, and then it's the Office 365. Okay. Each one of these, except Win 10, right? It is what it is there. Each EMS and Office 365 has 2 versions. They have an E3 version and an E5 version, right?
Almost. We have an F1 license as well.
Oh yeah, there you go. I didn't want to bring that up, but yes, but still it maps back here nicely. Sorry, if I could write, I'd be dangerous. So when you, of course, go E5, you get the E5 version. You go E3, you get the E3 versions. That's weird. And I mentioned I always default to E5 in these presentations to show you where you probably will end up. I haven't seen my customer base, and by the way, I support the entire federal civilian community, so I get to see the good, the bad, and the otherwise across the entire federal civilian landscape. And
hey Brian, sorry, this is Tawanda. It would be the same for Windows.
Okay.
With the E3 E5 component.
Okay. All right. I always just lump Windows by itself, but sure. Okay. So
so Brian, I'll ask you as you go through your presentation, then please point out the differences because contrary to what you may experience with other clients, our pocketbook situation does not look the same. So assuming that we're going to invest even more money when we're not sure that we're wringing the value out of what we have is a leap at this point.
Yep, that's certainly fair. And I had just one more thing to add here, and I think that I'll certainly call it out as I go along. From an EMS perspective, think of the leap from E3 to E5 as going from a manual approach to an automatic approach to certain things, and I'll call out where that happens, or a dynamic resolution approach, or machine learning in the E5. Whereas E3 is still you get the security, but a lot of it is manual, maybe not as much dynamic available. And the same thing kind of holds true here in Office 365 with the capabilities. Some of the automatic coordination that happens, you'll get in E5 versus E3. I'll show you some of the other differences as we go along here. Okay, but that was a good call, a good question. Somebody else has an input?
Brian, just one question too. We have a lot of F1 users, so I can't leave them out of the conversation because from a security perspective, I need to worry about all of them. So my question becomes, in addition to your E3 and E5 model, what is baseline? Can you tell us, just also break this up to, okay, here's what's included for every possible type of account in Office 365 from a security perspective, then here's what an E3 can get, and here's what an E5 can get. Because that's going to help us understand how we apply policy. And like, I'll give you an example. Today, for example, you can we can turn on the safe links, but the problem is from a licensing perspective, if I turn it on, it turns off the entire tenant. But from a licensing perspective, it's only technically licensed for, I think, E3 or E5. So how do I control these things? There's another feature in Outlook, for example, to encrypt email. It's available to everyone, regardless of license type. But if you read the documentation, it says it's only supposed to be licensed for E3 and E5. I can't do anything to stop a user from using it. So it becomes a real concern for us because we have such a mix of licenses. I can't just say we have E5 and turn everything on without potentially violating Microsoft licensing policies. And that makes me reluctant to turn any of it on.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. And so the two examples you just gave me come from an Office 365 perspective. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. So is Michael on? I don't know if he is or not. Michael Lord? Okay. Let's do this because I want to do that conversation justice, right? And that's a fair conversation. Can we label that one as one of those follow-up conversations to really go into how your various license situation affects your users from an Office 365 perspective, and when you turn on things, everything you just laid out? Can we label that as a deeper dive for a follow-up session?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. I would say that though it's still a valid question that needs to be addressed. When we negotiated the new agreement, and Julie is probably the best one from a Microsoft standpoint, at least to take point or redirect on this. We brought up that issue, and certain things Microsoft only had the granularity control at a tenant level, and but at the same time, the intent of those being assigned an F1 were generally folks who were using a shared device that was already going to be managed by somebody else, by some other resource, or covered by some other license. And so the intent was to make sure that the F1s were mostly for our task workers, mostly volunteers, but also some task worker based in staff positions using shared devices, whereas E3 and E5 licenses were thought to be assigned to knowledge workers or those who also needed a phone system, and therefore we're more likely to have their own device and to manage the devices and the user accounts. We tied and how we got to the quantity of EMS E3, not E5 licenses that we have, was we added up the number of E3 and E5, and that's why EMS E3 is that sum.
Yeah. So Julie, did you want to take lead on coordinating that deep dive with myself and Michael to talk about how the effects of F1 versus E3 and E5, how that came about, and the controls they can't do or do not have in place today?
I don't believe Julie's on, Brian, but we are adding the licensing discussion to tomorrow's conversation. It'll be top of the call with NS and Julie. So if we can hold tight.
Hey, Asia, this is NS.
Hey, NS.
Briefly, sorry, I missed the question. What was the question regarding the licensing?
It's, I think, a deep question. It's around the F1 user and what can the F1 user have access to in comparison to what Brian is showing here that's available in the E5.
Okay, got it.
How about we table that, because clearly nobody knows the answer to that right now, and it's almost irrelevant, right? Because we have what we have. I think what Vikas needs to know as you go through your presentation, Brian, is how do you apply these controls at something other than the entire tenant level? And if you must apply it at the entire tenant level, then we're needing an out from Microsoft to go, hey, we realize you've got a lot of F1 tenants and we don't have a way to exclude them, and because of that, you're okay, go ahead and apply it, and it won't break them. They just either won't have this feature or they'll get it and benefit from it. But he needs to understand the ramifications of turning some of these things on and off.
Yeah, and I think that's where I will definitely call that out where it makes sense here in the presentation. But it's good that NS was on this call today, because we're having that license discussion tomorrow. And so let's make sure, NS, we clear that up for tomorrow and make sure we can, guide Red Cross through those decision points and how we got to where we are and what they can do next. And NS, if you need to, we can debrief after the call if you need to get more information.
Yep, got it.
Okay. So I'm going to skip through because, I think we know, most of us on the call are familiar, and if I need to slow down, let me know. But this is the core of how we kind of gather some of our telemetry, the Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph. And this is, gathering all the telemetry we get, all the bad actors, the attachments that don't look right or that are known bad or that are unknown. All that telemetry is gathered and piped into our intelligent security graph and then subsequently pushed out to the various security endpoints within E5/E3. So this is the getting to a world without passwords, Windows Hello Authenticator and the FIDO security keys. Did I hear properly? Are you guys using or will be using the Microsoft Authenticator for MFA?
No, we're not using Microsoft's MFA.
Okay. Do you have an MFA solution that you're currently using today?
Yes, we're about to implement one. It's being deployed as we speak. It's from SecureAuth.
SecureAuth. Okay. All right. So that's still getting to, again, I talked earlier about, kind of reducing your vendor footprint. E3/E5 works with third-party MFAs, so we can talk about that later. But that's still getting to a world without passwords. This is really the key, in my opinion. This is an E3 and E5 capability with conditional access within Azure Active Directory. And I think you guys mentioned it when you're setting up your application policies, your device policies and such. This is what really kind of controls the decision point, rather than just a yes, no, you have the right credentials, or yes, no, you have the right device. But let's gather some other conditional information before we allow access to our valued resources and data, right? And so there's the first, this is the ultimate if-then statement. right? You have the conditions on the left. There's 4 columns on the left. We can evaluate the user, their device, the physical or virtual location, and where they're going, the client app or the authentication method. And then based off of those things, we'll do some machine learning and apply a session risk in the middle there, right? That's that real-time evaluation engine that happens. I talked before about the Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph and how that pipes in that data. That's what pipes into our machine learning at that point. So if Brian's machine authenticates from Washington, D.C. this morning at 9 a.m., and at 9:05 he's authenticating in Asia, right? That may be an indication of impossible travel. So the session risk then goes up. Or if my credentials are seen in that 40 terabyte of information being used on a dark web somewhere, it could be an indication that my credentials have been leaked in the hands of a bad actor. And so my session risk goes up. And so then you as the organization, right, you take the combination of where they're going, an array of things, plus the session risk, and you can apply the controls at that point. Allow, limit, require MFA. That could be the call out to your third party there. And then and only then, once all those things are satisfied, will the end user get to your Microsoft Cloud, your Office 365, any other cloud SaaS, as well as your on-prem. So I'll pause quickly here because how much of this are you guys using today from a conditional access? I know we're having issues with device join, and that's a big one. Is this machine compliant, or is this machine a machine that we know, grant access or not? How much of conditional access are you using today?
I can't speak to the devices. Matt's team would speak to that, but from the other stuff, I'm not aware of us using any of the other conditional access types.
Okay, so that is available, and that's a conversation that could be had, right? Just how do we set up, for instance, an application conditional access policy? I will allow you if you're in the right group or if your device is compliant, right? If you have a non-compliant device, even if the credentials are correct, right? Do you still want that user to have access to that on-prem application or web app? Do you want that end user to be able to go to your, third-party SaaS app if the impossible travel scenario is there, right? So these are some things that we can maybe have a deep dive in a future conversation. So I'll move forward. This kind of, before we get into the different columns, we just walked through a couple of scenarios here. And I'm not sure if you guys have run into this, but this is a scenario where a third-party site is hacked and the user credentials are exposed on the dark web. And it talks about the various pieces that's involved here, right? Azure Active Directory proactively identifies suspicious login attempts and challenges them with an MFA, right? That's that whole conditional access and that Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph assigning a risk score to that identity. I just talked about that. So that's part of that mitigation. Another part is potentially a Microsoft Cloud App Security detects an anomalous behavior, reduces the threat by limiting the data, access to the data and applications by that user. And then finally, advanced threat protection recognize a compromised account and the lateral movement, alerts the admins, and then gives a virtualization of the attack timeline for mitigation purposes. This is sort of like that coordinated dance, security dance that has to happen that M365, E3, and E5 presents. By the way, in Cloud App Security, are you guys at this point utilizing a CASB? Forgive me if you answered that already.
No CASB at this time.
Okay, all right. Here's another scenario. Malware gets onto a work PC through a personal email box. You may or may not, I think you said all your PCs corp issued, or do you have a mix of some BYOD PCs today that maybe just only get access to your email?
It's a mix. Okay.
So this scenario could be valid, right? Malware gets onto a work PC through a personal inbox, course, it's a phishing mail. Attachment is open, as most users will open. Malware affects the PC. The infection is detected by Windows Defender ATP, and this is just kind of calling out the various security components that could be in play here. Windows Defender ATP shares that information, those signals, with the intelligent security graph. The intelligent security graph then sends that signal. This is something bad is with this signal. Let's share it with our other endpoints. Shares it with Office 365 ATP, which then blocks that attachment and future attacks. Office 365 ATP then searches the company, all the other endpoints, to see if there's any other email attachments, and remove those attachments from the affected mailboxes. And then Windows Defender ATP remediates infected endpoints as a result of that intel gathered. That's sort of, again, you got in play here the Windows side of the Windows Defender ATP, the Intelligent Security Graph, Office 365 ATP, and Windows Defender ATP. Now, of this, I'm not sure, are you guys utilizing Windows Defender ATP at this point?
No.
Okay, so that's I take it you have something else in place that is protecting your endpoints
Yes.
outside. Okay, excellent. And this talks about,
Brian, what is, when you reference some of these things, can you reference the associated license that entitles one to use it as well, so we understand if we're leaving something unused that we own, or if it's something that is currently out of reach due to the licensing?
right. Cam Dryden, did you want to talk how Windows Defender ATP from a license perspective is built in, or where that comes into play?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. So exactly where we were kind of started out the conversation, these are E5 licenses, right? So it would be an add-on license to the Windows suite to give you the endpoint protection or endpoint detection and response capability of the Microsoft Defender ATP that you see in here. And as he's moving through this kill chain, you're looking at the Office 365 ATP, that would be an add-on to the Office 365 as an E5 license as well. So because these solutions are additive, they add on, they can be purchased as standalone, but typically most customers are getting them as part of the E5 packages.
For the Windows Defender ATP, does that require a Windows Enterprise desktop license as well?
Yes.
It does. Yes.
Okay,
And
so we don't have that either. That's why I wanted to make sure we were clear.
correct. And one of the interesting things here where we've renamed it, it's still in this slide, shows Windows Defender ATP, but we also are now stepping outside. So we have native support for the Mac OS. So it's now titled Microsoft Defender ATP, but you would license it as an E5, but it is not necessarily just for Windows endpoints anymore. And this will cover Windows 10, 8, 7, Server 2012, 16, 19, etc. And Mac OS, Mojave, and higher. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks, Cam. And so this is sort of what the investigations would look like in their Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, where it would show, the users that were investigated, the emails that came through, and what was, 5 email malware emails and 6 phishing emails. I know this is small, but it gives you a clear dashboard to see what has been happening, what was remediated, and gives you a good key view into your threats and security and what has happened from a malicious attack and how it was removed and addressed by Office 365. So let that build out. This is the last.
I'm sorry. This is Lynn with InfoSec. So you said the Defender ATP removes malware and phishing from email. So is that what I heard you say, phishing as well?
Yeah, so the ATP licensing does cover a couple of different facets from an email perspective. One being the safe links, so being able to analyze any URLs embedded into the email messages. The other one is safe attachments, so being able to protect the environment from zero-day attacks coming in from malicious files. That is where we're detonating in a virtual sandbox. The last component is there's an advanced phishing capability where we're able to use heuristics and machine learning analytics to help protect the environment from phishing attacks.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks, Cam. This is sort of the last one here, I believe, where a phishing mail comes in, the attachment is open, exploitation happens, user account is popped or compromised, sorry. Attacker attempts to a lateral movement, finds that privileged account, looks into the domain, now the domain is compromised, and then that's where the exfiltration of data start to happen, where they're piping out your data and has access to your sensitive data, right? So this is, again, talks about the realm, and this is still on the threat side, where Office 365 ATP does the malware detection, safe links, and safe attachments Cam was just talking about. Microsoft Defender ATP does the endpoint detection and response from an EDR and EPP perspective when it comes to the installation and command and control on the device. Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, right, looks for those brute force account hacks where the account is being compromised and such, and takes care of that from that perspective. Azure ATP, right, looks into the identity protection, takes care of the privileged accounts. We do have a privileged identity management component of which is in E5, where you basically take the keys away from your administrators, so they're not walking around with the keys to the kingdom. That's another part of that security strategy. And then lastly, you guys said you're not using cloud app security, but in a cloud app security model or CASB model, you would see that data exfiltration happening, and then the conditional access and such would extend to those cloud apps and say, wait, there's an issue with this account. I'm going to block this user from being able to send data outside of the organization. That's sort of how that protection, again, links hands, is coordinated across the attack kill chain. Any questions there? Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in, and just to clarify or go back to where we were, everything that you're seeing on here are E5 licensing features. So just to tie that in, the Azure ATP, that is where we're doing machine learning in the cloud against your environment for authentications, users, machines, how that's authenticating. And so we tie that back into what we know once we learn the environment, once we've profiled your environment and say, Vickis normally logs in from, this Microsoft Windows machine. He talks to these servers on the daily. When we see behavior outside of that, which is unnormal or unusual, that's where we start to flag and create alerts. But correlating that and tying that into the rest of the kill chain, that is how we start to determine if maybe an account was compromised, if there is lateral movement, protecting the actual domain, looking at all the traffic that's going across the network infrastructure. Again, these are all tips to help us to identify when there is an insider threat into the environment. And then the exfiltration of data using that Microsoft Cloud App Security component, as Brian talked about. So all E5.
I have a quick question. This is Mark. Can you guys hear me okay?
Hi, Mark, yes.
Okay. Once an account has been compromised, is there a quick way to kill the account or lock it out?
So part of that story, and I'll let Cam talk about from the threat side, but part of that story is if the identity protection piece, right, that Azure AD identity protection senses that the account has been compromised. We're seeing brute force of large attempts that account is tempted to log into all types of places in the environment or otherwise. We're going to assign a higher risk level to that account at that point.
Yeah, I'm not talking about brute force. I'm just talking about, like, let's say an account we know is compromised. We can see a log on from a foreign country.
Yeah, so I'm getting there. So So the first part of that is recognizing that the account has issues, and we assign a risk level. The identity protection assigns a risk level to that account of a higher risk level, say 4 or 5 or whatever. Any conditional access policies, this is the first part of it, and Cam will finish the rest. Any conditional access policies at that point will say, if this user is trying to get to Office 365, email, or anything that you guys have within this that's integrated with Azure Active Directory, we're going to block them, or we'll force this person to use MFA until something is resolved. That's the first part of that. We recognize there's an issue with the account. Conditional access policies kick in and start to buffer that person's access. And then Cam will take over from there.
So what kind of things do you evaluate when looking at somebody's account? When you're going to identify a risk level to an account that just logged in, what are some of the data points?
So within our intelligent security graph and that telemetry that we're gathering, right, we can see, for instance, if Brian Jameson's account has been attempted to not log into Red Cross, but it's out there trying to authenticate to some other domain unsuccessfully, right? We can see that potentially that's happened. There's some other information that we gather. We can see things internally that Cam will talk about from an Azure ATP perspective that can see if that account has been compromised internally and take some actions. Cam, did you want to go over the Azure ATP part?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely.
Well, I'm not sure if you're going to go over this, so I'm just going to ask the question. So as Mark had provided as an example, do you look see if that account, for instance, let's say the account logged in yesterday from, whatever, Arizona, and then the account logs in today from Washington, from a different state. Is that a data point?
Yes, that's the impossible travel piece that I talked about here in the conditional access slide.
Okay.
Right. So some of the conditions we evaluate, we're constantly with conditional access, and you set up these policies to get access to your resources. Your resources are here on the right? In anything within the Microsoft realm, cloud realm, any third-party SaaS apps, and if you integrate your on-premise and web apps through your Azure Active Directory, your on-premise and web apps as well. So this is the end goal. The conditions that we evaluate here are one of 4 conditions here, if not all 4. Things related to the user, right? What group they're in, the type of user, if they've been owned or whatever, the trusted device, things about the device, their physical and virtual location. Remember, I talked about impossible travel here, right? If I authenticate in DC at 9 and Asia at 9:05, that indicates impossible travel. Therefore, the machine learning part of conditional access will bump this session risk up to a higher session risk because we see this physical location could be an impossible travel scenario. And then you as the organization can say, right, maybe I don't want to stop productivity, but maybe I want to require MFA or force a password change in some scenarios. You have that control here.
Okay, is another data point that you look at when assigning risk level, would another one be logging in, different IPs are logging in at the same time?
So that could trigger a physical or virtual location risk level assessment, right? That could trigger that. But I think ATP, Cam, would ATP be a better candidate for that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, that's where we would be correlating the information between the 2 different. So when we're also then looking at the machine that you've just authenticated to from those different IPs, if we have never seen you authenticate from that machine before, or that IP address before, we tie that into, because we know what's associated with the Azure Active Directory instance. All these components and pieces, as we put them together, help us tell a story that doesn't necessarily make a determination of this is bad. It just says this is out of the norm. Let us increase the risk associated with it. And then what is the policy that you want to enforce when the risk level goes a little bit higher?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it was Mark. Did that answer your question as well?
It did not.
Okay.
Let's say we know we have a compromised account. If we reset the password, the token is still valid for, say, an hour. Is there a way to quickly say, this account is compromised, kill it?
My understanding in Azure AD, you can do that. Yes.
Yeah, you could also set a rule to block that account.
Right, but if we have an active attacker that we are watching doing things, and we want to cut off or terminate that account immediately, what Mark is saying is that it takes a while for it to that account to terminate.
Yes, as I mentioned, you can set a rule in EOP to block that account.
Right, that's an email only, Charles. I think what we're referring to, for example, right, is we'll get a user, this happens all the time, right? Their account is compromised from Nigeria or wherever. We see logins, they start sending phishing emails out to mailing lists, etc. But or they're setting up now OneDrive files as well and sharing those out. And what we need to do is immediately stop that account from being logged into. What happens is we can disable it, but because the token is still alive, they still have access to services to log in.
Well,
and that's what we're trying to kill. Is we want it to just immediately stop the ability to use any protocol to log in, SNMP, or whatever the protocol may be that they're using to get into the system. We need to stop it all.
So I think there's a couple things in play there, right? The first thing is a conditional access, right? You can if you get to want to do that, you can get to a point where you say, I want to stop all access to everything that's behind Azure Active Directory. If we think this identity protection gets triggered, we think the account has been compromised, you can set your conditional access policies to block all access to your endpoints or any backend applications and resources. So now, even if that account is still valid, we haven't disabled the account yet, even if it's still valid, they can't get to any of your resources. That's conditional access piece.
Okay,
right?
But how long does that take? Because as Mark said,
that's dynamic. That happens in milliseconds from a conditional access perspective. Because reason why I say that with the level of confidence, right? And I test this all the time. We show it in POCs, and we can certainly drill down if you'd like. That conditional access policy gets evaluated on every request to your backend applications, right? So anything that's going through Azure Active Directory, and I'll keep saying that. So that evaluation is happening every request. And so because the risk level could change at any moment, right? The conditions could change at any moment. So it's evaluated on every request. That's why the applications, the SaaS apps, the Microsoft Cloud apps, and your on-prem apps have to be integrated with Azure Active Directory. Now Azure Active Directory becomes that choke or control point that now can insert conditional access for every request. So now you stop the access to the backend application. So maybe they can log in, but they can't get anywhere. Now you can, on the front end, you can disable their account, as you guys were talking about from an Active Directory perspective, but the token is still alive, right? So with a disabled account and a live token that's yet to expire due to whatever expiration time frame that you have, lifetime selection you have for your token, that the account becomes effectively dead in the water. Now, one of the things that you may want to evaluate is how long now you're coming back to policy, how long you want that authentication token or access token to be alive before you have to re-authenticate. You can control that from a Azure ADFS perspective, or you can also control it, right? You can, believe most applications have the ability to request a new token on every request. You can do it from that layer as well. So the account effectively becomes dead in the water outside of a live token. Did I just make it clear as mud?
Yeah, you did. I mean, it's something for us to look into, the conditional access.
No worries. And so here's what I can offer, right? Let's really put a clear message, get in front of a whiteboard, bring the right resources to the table, and we can have this threat and conditional access story together in a deeper dive conversation.
Okay, I know
Okay.
I would like that.
Okay. Any other questions there? I think these are great questions. So I'll kind of breeze through the rest. This is the protecting information, protecting your information, your data, right? This talks about our classification and labeling, where we can do sensitive data. Now this piece says sensitive data is automatically detected. The label is placed in the metadata portion of the file, and then the labels are easy for the users to see and understand within whatever they're working with, the context of the app that they're working. The differentiator here is the automatic piece, right? Like I mentioned before, that's going to be more your EMS E5, wherein the EMS E3 will be more of your manual piece. And NS and team will go over that in more detail tomorrow. So again, labeling your content, you can add watermarks to your files. You can do a scan for your sensitive files and such on premise, right? So you can go at files at rest. You can go with files at rest and effectively scan and enforce your labeling classification of your files. This is important, right? Because once a file is labeled, no matter where the file ends up, on a thumb drive, in some cloud share somewhere, if it gets past your DLP policies, that label still lives with the file. If there's encryption that comes along with that, it stays and lives with the file. And it gives you visibility into what's happening with that file at all times. Who's attempted to open the file, where it's been attempted to open it, what users have attempted to open the file. Gives you complete control over your data, no matter where it goes. And we can really.
Quick question. This is Lynn. You may have already answered it, but as far as the DLP, what license is that under? Is that an E3? What license is that under? Or is it just an extra feature?
Right. So there's DLP in as part of Office 365, right? And I believe that's so let me not guess. NS, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm here.
The DLP in Office 365, is that E3 or E5, or did you want to talk about it?
DLP is an Office 365 E3 feature. There is some advanced e-discovery things that are in E5, but E3 is a core DLP feature. DLP is a core E3, Office 365 E3 feature.
And what are the advanced features in E5?
I'll have to, just go back offhand. I cannot recollect all those, but I can pull it together for you tomorrow when I talk.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Centralized management view. I take it you guys have seen some of this before, where you can, see across your environment. There's, this particular image shows that there's dashboard shows that there's 55 users at risk for one reason or another. There's 19% of your devices are in a non-compliant state. There's 4 devices with some sense of malware on it. There's 24 privileged OAuth accounts that lives in your environment. And then on the far left there, it talks about your secure score, right? Out of 1,000 potential security points that we assign, or that we say your environment should be at or could be at, you're at 417. Are you guys familiar with secure score, and have you worked with it before?
I've seen it, but I haven't worked with it.
Yeah, I've seen it in the past. It's changed interfaces recently since the last time I went in, but we've seen it. So
secure score says, hey, based off of your tenant and what you have enabled, E3 this or E5 that, F1, based off of what you're using in your tenant, based off of the type of organization that you say you are, federal, what have you. Here's your potential score that you should be aiming for from a security perspective. In this case, on the screen is 1,000, and it tells the customer, hey, you're at 417. And so the customer says, now what? So within that secure score, do I have one? Yeah, within that secure score, it'll give you recommendations on what to do next. If you enable MFA, that's an additional 75 points. If you take care of your privileged administrator accounts, that's an additional 150 points. Here's what risk that mitigates. By the way, it doesn't have to be taken care of, all the recommendations, with Microsoft only security implementations. For instance, you guys mentioned that you have a third-party MFA, right? You can say, well, we got MFA, it's just not enabled in the tenant here. We have it. So you can go in to the secure score here and mark MFA as being complete and say it's being handled by X product, and which will then up your score and give you more points towards your end goal. So Microsoft Secure Score is a great way to kind of, at a glance and in depth, if you will, look at your security posture and decide what to do next and how to up your security and why. This talks about threat analytics. I know we're past time here. I think the rest of this was just some summary. Are there any other questions? I know this is the ownership slide. We have a follow-up there. Are there any other deeper dive questions that we didn't get to in this particular presentation that we can maybe follow up tomorrow and or on a deeper dive session? Okay, so I have take a look at some cost governance. I have taken a look at the Office 365 deep dive about what it means with your F1, your E3, E5 users, how the licensings work. A deeper dive on Office 365 ATP and the threat landscape, and a deep dive on conditional access as takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more we can get into too. There's, for example, today I was in there trying to play with some of the policies to set up as well. Again, some of it I'm very reluctant to play with because I don't know what we're licensed to use and what we aren't. Again, this goes back to the whole mixed licensing thing. Until we have that licensing discussion, it's very clear to me what, from a security perspective, we can turn on and what we can't. Because again, I have to apply security to the entire tenant. I can't apply it to just 1Z, 2Z users who have certain license types. I need to have that conversation first to make sure what we do is okay and kosher by Microsoft, so we don't get in trouble in an audit.
That's fair. That's fair. And I think NS and team will cover a ton of that tomorrow, and we can go deeper even after tomorrow if need be.
Yep. And then I also had adding a Windows update conversation. Brian, would that be for you or for Tawanda?
Probably Tawanda.
Tawanda. Okay. All right. So add that to Tawanda's piece. The follow-ups, in addition to Brian for Tawanda, there was a request on modifying the text that's available in the Windows Update steps. There were some questions around AD Sync that need to be followed up on. Looks like Adam and Tawanda will be having a follow-up discussion specifically around autopilot and going deeper there. Were there any other Windows follow-ups that we need to capture for a later session?
We had discussed the length of time, how it's measured for the autopilot from beginning to end, how long it takes. But I'm sure we can put that together with a discussion of the others. Okay.
Yeah, I have just in general a deeper dive on autopilot, but I can make sure that that's a sub-bullet of that conversation. All right. Well, thanks for the time today. I did get the feedback